All right. Hi. My name is Sean Vanaman. I work at Campo Santo, and a while back I said I was going to do a writing Q&A. Our artist Jane Ing did an art Q&A that's awesome, and you can find it on the blog at blog.camposanto.com. And she did it in text, and I'm taking a break from writing, so I'm not doing it in text. I'm going to speak into a camera and go through a bunch of tweets that people sent me when I kind of said, hey, if you want to hear anything about trying to write a game like this or just sort of game writing in general, send me a tweet and I will do my best to answer it. So we'll see how this goes. All right, I'm just going to jump right in. These are in no particular order. These are just however they showed up. So, So Corey Sponsler asks, Firewatch is set in a very specific time and place. How do you write dialogue that sounds like it came from late 80s ruralish Wyoming? That is a good question. I didn't think about it when I started at all. It was not really a consideration, which was probably a mistake. It's kind of it feels like a very amateurish thing to admit, but I do a couple things, which is watch movies from the era, which is dumb, but it's a really quick way to make sure that I'm not saying things that I shouldn't be saying, and I'm not picking up normal colloquialisms that I use, because if you've ever played anything that I've worked on, most of the characters just sound like me or my friends, which I think is troubling sometimes. Even Lee, I think, in The Walking Dead can go, doesn't sound like he's who he is from where he is, but maybe I'm just being hypercritical. So yeah, I watch a lot of reference, and I've always done that. Especially in not just the getting it right for the era, but with how I want the game to sound. I watch a lot of shows and movies and things like this, and writers that I respect who are doing whatever I need to do. So right now I need the game to be pretty snippy. It needs to this game has a lot fewer long stretches of dialogue than anything I've ever worked on. So I look for writers and movies and things like that where people have much snappier back and forth dialogue. Matt Weiner from Mad Men does that. David Mamet, actually. The dialogue's all pretty snappy, even though there's a lot of it. So Glengarry Glen Ross is very pop, 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 pop. Older stuff. It's a movie called Charade that I really like. It was in the 50s. It's like a heist caper movie, but it has really snappy dialogue, and I like that a lot. So I also just look up 80s dialogue a lot, quite often. That's helpful as well. And then as for keeping it sounding like rural and from Wyoming, I'm from there, so I just kind of keep an ear out when I'm talking to people there. I was back there in October, and just little things, I went into the store, and the woman was like, do you want a sack? And I was like, what? Oh, I want a bag. Yeah, I want a sack for sure. So things like that. I try to just keep an ear open for that, and you're always kind of always got your your trap set for the new word or turn of phrase that you might end up using. Michael Mastroni asks, how has the structure of Firewatch compared to your past games changed your writing process and assumptions? A lot. It's really hard. I worked on a lot of adventure games at Telltale, which are relatively linear. And Firewatch is incredibly linear too, but we're focusing on being able to do things as you discover them, and for the relationship between you and Delilah to seem really natural. So for that relationship to be natural, Delilah has to know shit you've done. So if you said, oh, hey, I found, this lake and there's something weird about it. And she goes, okay, great. Yeah, good to know. Okay, fine. And then later you say, hey, I'm actually over here now. I'm at the whatever, burned meadow. She's like, oh, is the thing that you saw at the lake still relevant? Things like that. And that's just a lot of filling in the holes. It's really fun. But the process is completely different, where on let's just say like Walking Dead episode 1, like got in the writer's room, figured it out, wrote a first draft, built it, play tested it, wrote a second draft, shipped it. Like you just sort of figure out what's not working, take out the stuff that's not working, rewrite what you have to. Whereas with Firewatch, I'm going linearly, but every time I go to do a new voice session, I have like a list of bugs from the team and from playtests. It's like players wanted to go here, players wanted to do this, when player did this, expected Henry to say whatever. So I'm just backfilling possibility space, which is a much different process, but really fun. It's like, it's a completely different zone. It's just sort of like, it's like almost like improv, because you just get the bug, you think about it, you go, oh, it'd be really fun to say this, and then you don't do more than that. It's more fun that way, and I think the writing's better because of it. User JSP, at freelance JSP on Twitter, says, what were some early design writing misconceptions you had going in, things that others might share, and how were they resolved? Probably should have thought about this question before reading it, because that one takes a little thinking about what we thought about the game. I think I thought it'd be easier to like get in a really rough critical path of the game, and now that I'm having done that, it probably was, but I was too mired in the details of what players might want to do, as opposed to just getting in the stuff that had to happen for the story and then building the game around that. I could have been done a lot faster. So I think sometimes I outsmart myself. I think I sit there and I'm like, okay, this player just walked into this zone and they're going to want to do these 50 things or even 5 things. Whereas I should really just do the stuff they have to do and then ask people and watch them play the game and things like that. It's much better. More, because that allows you to get to playtest faster, and I think playtests are actually what make the game better. So, like Jake at the studio, we and I were talking after we did like our first real big playtest. It was like not doing a playtest is like holding on to a lie, and even when you let it out, no matter what it is, you just feel way better. So like even if the first playtest goes terribly and everybody hates the game, you're like, okay, we know what to fix, and you feel like you're on the right path, as opposed to just grinding on it in your head. So definitely that. Matt Duhamel asks, how do you keep the main characters tonally consistent as you're writing them? I don't know. I think some of it is probably... Well, there's 2 points. There's 2 parts. One is rereading all the stuff you've written before and trying not to touch it too much, tuning up what you have to. And then also, I'm the voice director, so making sure that the voice in the studio is tonally consistent is also a part of it. And if you get it wrong, you just have to redo it or just re-record it. And we have a pretty quick pipeline for doing that. I think at one point, our programmer, designer, Patrick, should probably talk about our dialogue pipeline in our database and writing process, because we started from nothing and you really take for granted even the broken ways you used to do things, because at least you knew how to way of doing them. But now we have a way of doing it, and it's not perfect, but the stuff that he's built in terms of getting content into the game and keeping a nice dialogue database is really, really, really good. So we should probably share that at some point. Cool. David Ma has a couple questions. Do you ever find it difficult to give up on an idea that just isn't working out? I don't, because I am lazy. So that's really your best trick. Just be really lazy, because if something gets hard, you go, oh, I don't want to do this anymore because it's hard. I think that's actually a strength of Jake and I both. No matter what it is, if we encounter something that's like sticky, one of 3 things has to happen. One is we know there's an answer and we're just not finding it, and we need that answer to move on. Like, we actually built the game around, let's say the story revolves around a moment that then in practice it doesn't feel right, it doesn't seem natural to the story, but we need something there. We just have to crack it, and if we can't, we're in trouble, and that doesn't happen very often. Another thing is you can just realize that you don't have to do it. We're pretty good at going like, wait, we don't have a good idea for this. finding the good idea isn't fun. And that's a really sort of trite way of putting it, but it's the quickest way to communicate what I'm trying to say. It's just I'm not enjoying the process of trying to find the solution. So like, why do is this necessary? And then the question of, is this thing necessary or not, makes it a lot easier. Because if it is necessary, you're probably excited about it, and then it makes it easier to solve the problem. If it's not necessary, you can just not do it or cut it or whatever. And that doesn't just go for game design. That comes with just like running a company too. Not to say that there aren't necessary things that are a total drag, but you make peace with those things. Yeah, and then there was a third option. Have to do it. Can do it. Can't remember what I was going to say, but yeah. So no, I don't find it hard. I find it easy to be like, nope, this is too difficult. I'm going to not do it, or move on, or just give up the idea. Like, we have too many ideas that are good to really like fall in love with any of them. Like everybody at the company, especially Ollie, is a particularly like strong idea person, and everybody is. I mean, ideas come from everywhere, even like just absolutely everywhere. My favorite thing is like when Will pop up, or somebody says, "Oh, hey, it'd be cool if," or "Wouldn't it be if this moment actually played like this?" Like, yeah, absolutely. Like, that's the best, because I can just like write it down and go, that's how that happens. Sorry, I keep bumping my desk. I'll stop doing that. David Ma, second question. How do you balance realism versus the realities of production and the needs of the story you're trying to tell? I don't really focus on realism that much. Plausibility and suspension of disbelief are more important to me. You know, there's a whole bunch of mechanics and shit in the game that's just like not the way things work. There's a bunch of that stuff, but I don't feel like it passes our like the 10 of us. It passes our like sniff test of like, oh yeah, that's plausible and entertaining. So that's really the measure of that. And then in terms of production reality, you just cut the least needed things always, and you just left with what is required to make it good. A lot of those things seem crazy. There's a lot of embellishments, but they're obviously necessary, or we wouldn't have them in the game. So, Barbara DeKegel asks, does the story exist without the gameplay, or was it focused on that from the beginning? No, they get made hand in hand. Like, they have to, much more so than anything else I've ever worked on. Yeah. It's funny, the Firewatch, actually like sitting at this desk like years ago when Jake was my roommate through that door, I kind of like was talking about an idea of like almost like a puzzle game, and more like almost more like Myst, which is a bad thing, I think, and not something I'm particularly skilled at making. But you know, as we broke down what we were good at, theme and mechanic had to like really sync up. So using this radio to talk to somebody else, and you can talk to the things that you're seeing or experiencing, or the places that you are, kind of makes everything like sync right up. So having to go to places to discover new things, having to actually like look at and target something to talk about it, all kind of make the theme of the story, talking to another person and like building a relationship, like work well with the mechanics. So those things have to kind of get in sync, but it's not like a medical process. It's not like the whiteboard where it says like, here's the theme and here's the mechanic. It's more of a reductive, intuitive process of making sure that like, yeah, it would be cool if in our game, like there's no jump button in Firewatch, and like, would it be cool to jump around the world? Maybe, but like, what does it mean? And what is it actually doing for the story is another matter. So then we don't need it. And that's really like how you end up with something that I think has a tight sort of gameplay and thematic relationship. Cool. Hui Hong asks, when deciding on characters' names, do you consider how each name would sound under another character's accent? Yeah, I like hear the name a lot in my head. I'm really bad at character names, like awful at character names. Like Tim Schafer is amazing at it, and it drives me crazy. But having talked to him and people who work with him, apparently he puts a lot of time into it, so that doesn't make me feel as bad. I put a lot of time into it, and it's still garbage. I like the name Henry. We play with it a little bit. The name Hank comes up, which is short for Henry. Delilah is just a name I think, I don't know where that came from. I just kind of pitched it, and I hung on to it. And then he calls her D a lot, which I like. My friend Danielle, like, I call her D, I've noticed now, from time to time. So yeah, I do. You have to hear everything out loud. You have to kind of hear how every character is going to say whatever you're writing all the time. Andrew Mandula, do you start from a different place when writing for games? Since games are largely about conflict, do you write a conflict first? I think a lot of things are like, I mean, a lot of like postmodern storytelling is conflict oriented. So, yeah, the type of writing that people find entertaining these days is always conflict oriented. And so, no, I don't find that any different than writing anything else. I had some really great professors in college, and one of them, this guy Percival Everett, one day just posited, like, what is a story? He's like, a story is a conflict, and a conflict is a mess. And what is a mess? And he sort of like sits there for a second, and he goes, a mess is 10 gallons of shit in a 5-gallon bucket. And you just sort of like let that hang in the air, which is actually like ridiculous sounding, but correct. It's just more stuff fit into a space than it can hold, so it spills out and you have to sort of sort through it. And I thought that was always really good advice. But yeah, like every time we kind of got stuck early on Firewatch is because we didn't have a conflict. There wasn't a thing. And I think that is actually true about writing. Again, like this sorts of like popular fiction, I think you can just say that. Not to say that like you can't, like I just watched the movie The Trip, or The Trip to Italy, which is the follow-up to the movie The Trip. And like it's by and large a conflictless movie, but there is inner conflict within the characters that is absolutely addressed throughout the story and ends solely on that. It doesn't end on a joke or a gag or anything like that. So there's always something. But that movie gets away with like, you know, just on the personalities of its actors for like 2 hours with minimal conflict. At Video Dante on Twitter asks, do you write stories intending an emotional impact, or you just accept that when it happens? What do you want a story to do? Mostly entertain and provoke and surprise, delight. I don't think about emotion. I mean, emotional impact is like, that's a pretty broad term, right? Like if you're not emotionally impacted by a story, even in like the smallest sense, even if you're just like tickled, yeah, I don't really know what you're doing. So yeah, I mean, it's like the implicit intent of creating anything that's creative, like a narrative about people. But it's not like, this is really gonna get them. Like I didn't think of that about The Walking Dead. Maybe like episode 5 of Walking Dead. Like I knew once it was like in the studio and on the page and stuff, we all did that, you know, and like everybody had that moment on their episodes where it's like, oh, this is really gonna like get people. But this is not my mode. Like I could recognize that after the fact, but it wasn't like, you know, it wasn't like the goal ever. Jonathan Crossley, do you give yourself a set number of rewrites? If not, how do you decide to put something aside and move on to a different task? I am the worst writer in that I am like a one and done and then revisit and tinker and move on. It's because I'm really lazy. So I don't have to give myself a set number of rewrites. You just know if it hits my quality bar and I like it, I think there's enough good stuff in there, I'd leave it aside. I've never really had that like troubling like need to like tinker with the writing until it's perfect. I do with the story. Like I do mean that different than like the dialogue. The dialogue is a little bit whatever, but with the story, like I gotta like really, really tune until I feel comfortable with it, so I can start writing. Because if I'm not excited about where it's going and confident about where it's going, it's really hard to do the work. So Yeah, and no sort of set number, just sort of deadlines of like it has to be done by this time, or yeah. Ed Cannell writes, "Why this story? What made you guys want to tell it? Why not? Like, I don't really know. I have no idea. Um, and just it started with the germ of an idea and some really like some imagery in a place we wanted to go, and then people started responding to that stuff. And before you knew it, we had a company and a game we were working on. Like if Ollie doesn't come along and say, "Oh man, I love this imagery. Like here, let me like sketch something and I'll show you what it could look like." If Will doesn't come along and say like, "Yeah, like I love games where you do this sorts of thing," and Jane doesn't come along and say, "Oh, like this is this sort of stuff I can make and this is how I would do it and this is what it's going to look like and feel like." Like none of it happens, and all that stuff contributes to the story. Yeah, it does. You don't have to have like a grand big idea. You just have to have an idea, and then you'll make it into something interesting. And I think the more specific you make that idea, the better. And I feel like old LucasArts games like really did that. And I think that's probably, even though it's a first person whatever, like a relationship puzzle exploration game, not really a puzzle game, but like it doesn't look or feel like an old adventure game, or it doesn't look and sound like an old adventure game. I think it tickles the same sort of like thing that I liked about those games, which is just being somewhere really specific and figuring out the details of that place. Games are incredibly good at doing that, but oftentimes like make you move on or forget that they're like set somewhere really interesting. That's worth just tooling around in. Cool. Dennis Lennart asks, "How has your process changed since The Walking Dead?" I talked about this a lot earlier. It's less just hammer out a full script and record it, and more like piece by piece by piece by piece by piece. So you would like working out that way, probably. Not that the Telltale way it wasn't awesome, and I kind of like when I'm having trouble, I miss it. Just being able to like lock myself away and write the full script as opposed to writing like the layers of it. But it's cool. It's fun. And then Nevin Morgan, from our friends / partners / brothers in arms at Panic, has asked, "Do you have an ideal plot structure in mind? Not necessarily something you always stick to, but something you consider perfect." Man, that's a really good question. No, I don't. I don't think consciously. I think it's subconscious. I think there are rhythms and ups and downs to a structure, to a story structure, that sometimes are just there by nature of the person who's making it. And I think like this next stage of my development as a writer would probably be more cognizant of that in myself, and subverting it. And I think an ideal structure is just there to serve your the audience's like investment in the story, so they don't ever feel like there's two sort of like, where is this going, right? There's like, where is this going? Like, oh my god, like, or like, where is this going? Like, what? And I think that second one is always really fun. It doesn't have to be that way, but it's always kind of exciting when a movie, you sort of do that, like you're in the theater, you're an hour in, or you're in a game and you're like, you think you're almost done, and you're like, I have no idea. Like, this should have been like, there's nothing left. Like Cabin in the Woods was like a great example of that. Not that it's like a sensational movie or anything, but like I remember being there and 55 minutes in, sort of like breaking out of the movie and like thinking about how long I'd been there, and even looking at my phone and being like, this has got like 45 minutes left. What in the world? And that just means that like that structure was like, it subverted structure in a way that I thought was really interesting. So no, I think whatever structure you have should just like serve to keep people engaged and not lost and feeling like you're respecting their time. And I think that's a big thing that games struggle with. All games struggle with it, especially and because time is so elastic. That's a really good question, though. I should probably think about that more. So I think that's everything. Yeah, hopefully this all recorded well, and hopefully you find this valuable. It's 21 gigs. That's really big. Fuck. Hopefully I can make it not so big. Yeah, so thanks a lot. And if you have any questions for us at Campo Santo, hit us up on Twitter at Campo Santo. Our blog.camposanto.com. We try to keep updated as much as possible with things like this. And yeah, check out Firewatch if you don't know what it is yet. We have a trailer on YouTube. We have some playthroughs, and we have really exciting stuff coming in terms of what the game is and letting people play it and that sort of stuff in the coming months. So thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you guys soon.